Masechet Sanhedrin, Daf Pe Chet. On the previous daf, we saw two baraitot. The first baraita went through every word in the pasuk regarding Zaken Mamre and explained that each word is referring to a whole area of halacha that the Zaken Mamre law will apply to. Then in the second baraita, we saw the opinion of Rabbi Meir that Zaken Mamre only gets killed if he contradicts the Sanhedrin in a law that would require karet if done b'mezid and korban hatat if done b'shogeg. And now Rav Papa is trying to reconcile those two baraitot. How can we find a case in each one of those examples of the first baraita that would lead to karet? And what we're looking for is a machloket in each one, where we see that each issue, there is in fact a machloket, and if the Sanhedrin would follow one side of the machloket, and the Zaken Mamre would follow the other side of the machloket, then there would be a dispute about a karet case. So we have to link each of these to a machloket and show how it could lead to a difference of opinion, whether someone gets karet or not. Okay, so that's what we're up to, and this says the word divrei in the pasuk, and the baraita says elu ha'arachin v'charamim v'hekdeshot divrei, which means words. This applies to arachin, that's official valuations. If someone says erki alai, or the erech of someone else is upon me, then he has to pay to the Bet HaMikdash the fixed amount that's said in the Torah, depending on the gender and age. There's 8 different categories. And depending on which category, you have to pay that amount. And then haramim and hekdeshot, that's other things. These are all called divrei because one makes a vow and says, I'm going to dedicate an item or I'm going to consecrate an item. And then you have to pay all these things. Now, it would seem that this would have to do with monetary laws and also hekdesh. How could it lead to karet? We'll see. So let's go one by one and find the machloket. Harachin, biplukta Rabbi Meir v'Rabbanan ditnan amarich pachot ben chodesh. Rabbi Meir omer noten damav. Chachamim omrim lo amar kelum. We have a baraita, even though it says ditnan, that says if someone says, I'm going to give the eirich of this little baby, and the baby is less than 1 month old. Now, there's no category for a baby that's only less than 1 month old. It's not, the Torah doesn't have a category for that. So what do we do with his words? So the Rabbi Meir says he wouldn't say his words for nothing. He must have meant something else, and he has to give something. What does he have to give? Well, he'll have to give the market value on the slave market of that infant, and he has to pay that amount. Because we assume that a person is not going to make a vow for nothing, so even though he used the wrong terminology, erech, he must have meant market value. Chachamim, however, say, no, he meant what he said, and he said erech. There is no erech for an infant under 1 month old, and therefore he doesn't have to give any money at all. Okay, so now let's come up with a scenario where this will lead to karet. If the Sanhedrin follows the opinion of Chachamim, and Chachamim say, even though you said the statement, the eirech of that little infant is upon me, you said nothing, and therefore you can keep your money. And so, if you have that money and you use it for kiddushin, the kiddushin is valid. And if someone would commit adultery with that woman, then that would be isur karet. Let's assume there's no witnesses, but he did it b'mezid. That's isur karet. How if a Zaken Mamre comes and says, no, I agree with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, and therefore this money is not his. It belongs to Hekdesh. He has to give it to Hekdesh. Hekdesh can come and take it. And so if it would use it for Kesef Kiddushin, the money is not his. The woman is not valid, the kiddushin is not valid, and therefore there is no adultery and there's no karet. And there you go. Here's a difference of opinion regarding karet within the area of halacha of arachin. Next one, haramim. Big pluta de Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera v'Rabbanan ditnan. Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera omer setam haramim lebet hakabait shneimar kol cherem kodesh kadashim hu laHashem. So regarding cherem, there's 2 types of cherem, and if you specify, that's a simple case. A cherem can go to the Bet HaMikdash. I'm donating this item, animal or thing, to the Bet HaMikdash. Then it goes to, if he's donating it to Bedek HaBayit, it goes to the upkeep of the Bet HaMikdash. They own the value of that thing. they own the thing itself or its value if you want to redeem it. Or a person could say, I'm going to make this cherem to a kohen, and then you have to give the item to a kohen, and then it's the personal property of the kohen. So if you specify one way or another, then it's clear it'll go to Bedek Habayit of the Mikdash, or it will go to the kohen. But what if someone doesn't specify? He just says, this is going to be cherem. What do we assume? That's a machloket. Rabbi Yehuda ben Betara says, if you didn't say anything, then it goes to Bedek Habayit, because the pasuk says, Kol cherem, all dedicated offerings are going to be Kodesh Kadashim La Hashem. So all, well, not if you say to a Kohen, then it's not. But otherwise, if you don't say to the Kohen, we assume it goes to the Bet HaMikdash. Hachamim אומרים, סתם חרמים לכהן, שנאמר כי שדה החרם, לכהן תהיה אחוזה. Hachamim say that if you don't specify, then it goes to the Kohen, because there's another pasuk that says, Kistei acherem, as a field dedicated to the priest, shall be its possession. So here we have a situation. Let's say someone says, makes a stam cherem. Okay, good. Now, according to Chachamim, it's going to go to the Kohen. Now the Kohen has this item, or this money. What if he takes this item, and he does kiddushin with it? According to Chachamim, that's a valid kiddushin, and therefore anyone who commits adultery with his wife, that would be isur karet. Whereas, according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, the Kohen does not own it. If the Kohen would take that item anyway and go try to do Kiddushin, there would be no Kiddushin, and she would be valid. She would be kosher, and no problem of karet for adultery. So there you go. Here we have a machloket regarding chadamim. We're just going to continue this source because it adds a side point. Imken matamud omar kodesh kadashim hu la Hashem. In this Mishnah, it asks, according to Chachamim, why does the pasuk say kodesh kadashim la Hashem? It sounds like it goes to God. That was the proof text for the Yehuda ben Betara. What do Chachamim learn from that? And the answer is shechal al kodesh kodashim v'al kodashim kalim. The answer is that you can make a cherem even on an animal that is already a sacrificial animal, whether it's a kodesh kodashim animal like a olah or a kodashim kalim animal. If someone says this thing is going to be cherem, then he will have to pay the Kohen the value of the benefit that he gets from the fact that he has control of this korban, the fact that he gets to bring it as an olah. That's worth a certain amount of satisfaction and benefit that he can bring this korban. And so even though it's consecrated, he'll still have to pay a certain amount to the Kohen. That's what we learned from Kodesh Kadashim La Hashem. But Chachamim stick with their view that Stam Cherem goes to the Kohen. Next item on the list, Hekdeshot. Biplukta Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Rabbanan Detanya. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Afilu Sinora Shel Hekdesh, Siricha Asara Bnei Adam, Liftota. So a Hekdesh item, that's subject to a machloket between Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and Rabbanan. Because the Braita teaches, let's say I have an item that is consecrated. I consecrate it, but now I want to redeem it. So I want to pay its value. So in order to assess how much the value is, you need judges. How many judges do you need? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is very stringent. He says, even if it's a little fork, a simple item, still you need 10 people to come and evaluate. This fork is worth $50. And so then you'll pay $50 to the Mikdash, and then you can keep the fork and use it for yourself. Hachamim disagreed. They say you only need 3 judges. So what happens if one has a consecrated item, let's say a fork, and then he assesses it in front of 3 judges, and then he takes the fork and he gives it to a woman as kiddushin. According to Chachamim, that evaluation was perfectly valid. So therefore the redemption is valid. So the fork was his, so the kiddushin is kiddushin, and if someone sleeps with that woman, that's considered adultery and would be karet. According to Eliezer ben Yaakov, if you did the assessment only with 3 judges, no good, because you need 10, and therefore that fork is still hekdesh. And if you got the fact that you gave it to a woman and said mikudeshet li, is nothing happened. She's not mikudeshet, she's not an eshet ish, there is no chiyuv karet for adultery. Ribot, next item. Ze hashka'at sotav, arifat haigla, v'taharat mesorad. Now back to the Braita. It says the word rivot in the pasuk is referring to different types of dispute. One is the water that the bitter waters that the sotah drinks. That's because of a dispute between a husband and wife. And egla arufa, because of a dispute where someone murdered someone else, and we don't know who did it. So we have to do the Egla Arufah ceremony. And Mesorah is also because of a dispute. Someone says Lashon Hara about someone else, and they get Mesorah. And if there is a machloket between the Sanhedrin and the Zaken Mamre about any of these issues that relates to karet, then the Zaken Mamre will get the death penalty. Okay, so how could these various issues lead to karet? That's the next question. Hashkat sotah b'pluktad Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Yoshua. Ditnan hamkaneh li'ishto Rabbi Eliezer omer mekaneh al pi shenayim umashke al pi ayed echad or al pi asmo. Regarding a sotah, how do you become a sotah? It's a two-step process, as the Mishnah says in Masechet Sotah. First, you have to give a warning. The man has to tell his wife, listen, I'm giving you a warning. I don't want you to seclude yourself with Bob. That guy over there, Bob, I don't trust him. I don't trust you with him. So he does a warning. Now the warning, Rabbi Eliezer says, has to be done in front of two witnesses. Rabbi Yoshua is going to agree with that. It has to be two witnesses. So everybody agrees that's the stage one. Now, what if she actually goes and secludes with Bob? So how many witnesses do you need for that? So according to Rabbi Eliezer, he says, Al pi ayed echad or al pi atzmo. Even if one witness saw that she secluded with Bob, or even if he himself, the husband, saw it, then she is a sotah. One of the consequences of being a sotah, let's say she says, I don't want to drink. I refuse to drink. Well, she's going to have to get divorced, and she loses her ketubah. Okay, so that's, she will lose her ketubah based on one witness. Rabbi Yoshua omer mekaneh pishanam mashkel pishanam. Rabbi Yoshua agrees that the warning has to be in front of two, but he disagrees regarding the actually becoming a sotah if she is secluded. Rabbi Yoshua says that also requires two witnesses. If only one witness sees her being secluded with Bob, doesn't count as anything. She is not a sotah. Therefore, we'll have a difference of opinion regarding karet. If she is warned in front of two witnesses, that's everybody says, and then she secludes herself in front of one witness. According to Rabbi Eliezer, she is a sotah. If she refuses to drink, then she loses her ketubah. According to Rabbi Yoshua, she is not a sotah, and she gets control of her ketubah. So let's say she takes her money of her ketubah, and she gives it to someone to use for kiddushin. According to Rabbi Yoshua, that's valid. She deserves that her ketubah, because she was never a sotah, there was only one witness, and therefore the kiddushin is a valid kiddushin if she gives the money to someone, to a man, to do kiddushin with some other person. And if that other person commits adultery, there will be a sort of karet. Whereas according to Rabbi Eliezer, the fact that she took that money was not hers, and if she gives it to someone else, it's not his either. And you can't do kiddushin with money that isn't yours, and therefore that woman that he gave the money to is single, and there's no adultery and no prohibition of karet. Next item, Arifat Aigla, Bepluktad Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Akiba Titnan. Me'ayin hayu modedin, Rabbi Eliezer omer metiburo, Rabbi Akiba omer mechotmo, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov omer makom shenasa halal misavaro. When a murder victim is found between cities, then the judges come out and measure which city it's closest to. And then that city has to bring an egla, calf, and they use that calf to do the whole ceremony by breaking its neck in the back. The body of that eglah is prohibited for use. No one can get any hana'ah from it. So, if someone uses that eglah for kiddushin, let's say the guy who owned it beforehand, would that be valid or not? So that will depend on if the eglah is valid or not, which will depend on whether the city that they measured to be closest was really the closest city or not. So that's how this ties in. There's a Mishnah that says, from where on the body of the victim did they measure? Because it could be his leg is closer to one city, but his arm is closer to another city, and his head is closer to that city, if he's really right on the border, just in between the different cities. So there's a three-way machloket about this. Rabbi Eliezer says we measure from his belly button. Rabbi Akiva says from his nose. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says from the place where he was killed, meaning from his neck, which is where people are slain if they are slit in the throat. And so these are three different spots that we measure. So let's say, according to one of these opinions, they're closer to city A, and according to another opinion, they're closer to city B. And if the Sanhedrin decides, okay, we should do according to the opinion that says city A, and then they bring that igla, and that is done, igla rufa, that's prohibited for use. If someone would bring that as kiddushin, there would be no kiddushin. Whereas if then the Zaken Mamre says, no, I think it's from a different city. And then according to that, this igla is private property. So if the one who owns it uses it for kesef kiddushin, then that kiddushin will be valid. And so you'll have a difference of isur karet if someone then commits adultery with that woman. Taharat misora b'pluktad Rabbi Shimon v'Rabbanan ditnan en lo bohen yad bohen regel ozen yemanit en lo tahara olamit. When it comes to the purification ritual of a misora, there is a machloket between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbanan. In the case this is Mishnah Negaim, part of the ritual for making a misora tahor is that they put some blood on his right big thumb, his right big toe, and upon his right ear. Some blood and oil are placed on that spot. Now, what if the misora doesn't have a thumb or a big toe or a right ear? Let's say they're cut off. So there's three opinions. Tanakama says he can't get purified. He's going to be tameh forever. There's a consequence to being tameh forever, which is that anyone who's tameh, who enters into the Bet HaMikdash, will get karet. So this person, if he goes in according to the Rabbanan, he will get karet. Rabbi Eliezer Omer noten al mekomo v'yoseh. Rabbi Eliezer says you can just put some oil and blood on the stump, wherever the thumb was cut off from. There's whatever is left, just put it on that stump, and that's it. He's tahor. Rabbi Shimon Omer noten al shel semol v'yoseh. Rabbi Shimon says if he doesn't have a right thumb, put it on his left thumb. He doesn't have a right ear, put it on his left ear, and then he's fine, he's tahor. So here we have a situation, if the Sanhedrin would rule like Chachamim, and say, this guy, it's great, you put it on his left ear, but that doesn't help anything. He's still tameh forever. If he goes to the Bet HaMikdash, he will get karet according to Rabbanan. If the Zaken Mamre comes and says, no, I think the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon. You put it on his left, that's okay, he's tahor. So then the Zaken Mamre is arguing that he doesn't get karet. So that would be the case that Rabbi Meir could explain this case. רבי שעריך זה לקט שכחה ופאה, לקט תתנן, שני שיבולין לקט שלושה אינן לקט, שכחה שנאמרים שכחה שלושה אינן שכחה, ועל כולן בית שמאי אומרים שלוש לעני וארבעה לבעל הבית. So the word bisharecha, back in the pasuk regarding Zaken Mamre, that is a reference to the laws of leket shikha and leaving corner. The Mishnah teaches in Masechet Pe'ah. If there were two stalks that were cut and left in the field, those belong to the poor person. If there were three stalks, then the owner of the field can take them. And if the poor person takes them, then that would be stealing. They don't belong to him. And shichicha is the same thing, but instead of with stalks of wheat, it's with an entire sheaf of wheat. And so if there are two sheaves that are left out there, then the poor person can take them. They belong to him. The owner cannot take them. And if there's three, then the poor person cannot take them. That would be stealing. So that's the difference between 2 and 3 according to Tanakama. But regarding both of these, Bet Shammai disagrees, and he says if the owner forgot 3 stalks or 3 sheaves in the field, then the poor person gets them. But if he left 4, then the farmer can take them, and the poor person is not allowed to. So we'll have a difference of opinion regarding 3. Let's say there's 3 stalks that are left out there, and the poor person takes it. And he takes those sheaves and he gives it to a woman, and he says, Haret mikodesh li, he tries to do kiddushin. According to Bet Shammai, that's totally valid. They belong to him. That kiddushin is valid. She is an eshet ish. If she would commit adultery with someone, the punishment would be karet. karet. But if the Zaken Mamre says, no, I disagree with that, let's say Chachamim follow Bet Shammai, and the Zaken Mamre says, no, I follow Chachamim, so that means there were 3 out there. The poor person has no right to take the 3. That's stealing. It doesn't belong to him. He gives it to a woman, no kiddushin, and no adultery, no isur karet. Pe'ah, b'pluktad Rabbi Ishmael v'Rabbanan, ditnan, misvat pe'ah lafrish min hakama. So regarding pe'ah, we have a machlok between Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbanan. As it says in a baraita, the mitzvah of pe'ah is to leave off a corner of the field while this grain is standing, while it's attached to the ground. You leave it off, and the poor people, they will come and they will harvest it. But let's say he didn't do that. He forgot. Lo yafrish min hakama, yafrish min ha'omarin. So then he can give a certain amount to the poor people from the sheaves. And so they'll take that same amount, but now it's in sheaves, it's already cut. That's okay. He doesn't have to give maaser yet, because while still in the field, he doesn't have to give maaser. If he didn't do that either, and he already gathered in all of the grain and put it on a pile, he can still leave a section of it, and this will be for the poor. As long as he didn't smooth out the pile, he doesn't have to take maaser yet. So he can give that part to the poor, and then the rest of it he'll take for himself, and he'll give maaser after he smooths it out. But mereho, once he smooths out the pile, then it's already chayab b'maaser. So me'aser v'noten lo. He has to take maaser at that point, and then he gives a section to the poor as pe'ah. If after he still didn't give pe'ah after that, and he already ground it into flour and is making bread, then he doesn't give pe'ah at all. He lost his chance to give pe'ah. It's too late. That's Tanakama. However, Rabbi Ishmael said that even if he forgot that whole time all those steps, and now he's already making the dough, and he never gave pe'ah, still he has to give pe'ah even from the dough. Therefore, if a poor person would come while someone is making the dough, and the person forgot, didn't give pe'ah, and the poor person comes and takes a section of it. According to the Bishmael, the poor person has every right to take it. It's his. If he does kiddushin with it, then that marriage is a valid marriage. And if someone commits adultery, there will be chayav karet. Whereas, according to Tanakama, that's it. There's no more pe'ah anymore. And the poor person who takes it is stealing. And therefore, if he gives it to a woman as kiddushin, there is no kiddushin and no prohibition of adultery and no isur karet. That's it. We managed this exercise. We went through every single example on this list and managed to explain them all according to Rabbi Meir as being Isur Karet. And on the way, we got to learn many, many fascinating machalokot in all different areas of halacha. We now return to the Mishnah from a couple of dapim ago that taught Shelosha Bete Dinin. There were 3 high courts in Jerusalem, one at the entrance to the Temple Mount, the next one at the entrance to the Temple Courtyard, and the third one in Lishkat HaGazit, that's the greatest Sanhedrin. And they would come and present their case to the third greatest, and he would say, the Zaken Mamre, the Mufle, the person who's in charge of the lower court, would come and say, here's what I taught and here's what they taught, or Lamaditi, or Kach Darashti, this is what I learned from Pasuk, and this is how they learned the Pasuk. And if the third highest court knows the answer, they had a tradition, they would say, if not, it goes to the next one, and if not, it goes to the highest court. Okay, now Rav Kahana is going to teach that there is a distinction in the type of authority that the Zaken Mamre cites in order to prove his point. Amar Rav Kahana, Hu omer mipi hashimoah vehen omrim mipi hashimoah eno neherag. Rav Kahana says, if the Zaken Mamre comes and says, I have a tradition, I learned this from my teacher, he told me that the halacha is A. And then his disputants say, oh, we also have a tradition that halacha is B. And the Sanhedrin decides according to B, and they say, that's the halacha. But the Zaken Mamre says, but I have a tradition. And he goes against the Sanhedrin. He does not get the death penalty because even though he's going against the Sanhedrin, he's not supposed to, but he has a tradition that he's relying on. So we can't kill him when he has a valid oral tradition. And similarly, if the rebellious elder says, I don't have a tradition, but this is what it seems to me is the best, through reason, this is what he figures out is the best option for halacha. And the Sanhedrin also doesn't have a tradition, and they say, this is what we think the correct opinion is. So he's also not killed because what right do they have to kill him? They don't have a tradition that this is the halacha. They just, we think this differently. So he thinks differently. Although he's supposed to go with the Sanhedrin, but you're not going to kill him for going against them, because they don't have any higher authority in the sense of tradition. And all the more so, if the Zaken has a tradition, and they said, we don't think that makes sense to us. Just based on reason, they come up with something else. For sure, you're not going to kill the Zaken Mamre, because his authority is actually greater than theirs. The way he learned it is from a tradition that has a greater connection to the halacha, to the Torah Sheba'al Peh than them. So then they're not going to kill him. When do you kill a Zaken Mamre? Only it's the flip side of that one. Ad sheyomar kachu be'ainai v'hen omrim mepi hashimoah teda shere lo hargu et akabya ben mahalalel. You'd only kill a Zaken Mamre if he says, listen, this is my opinion based on my reasoning. I think halacha is A. But the Sanhedrin say, we have a tradition of oral law that says halacha is like B. There, the Zaken has no standing at all. And that's where he has nothing to defend himself, and that's where he gets capital punishment. And now we bring a proof that Rav Kana brings a proof that this is so, that 3 out of 4 cases we don't kill him, because look, they did not kill Akavya ben Mahalalel. He was a very important, very famous sage during the time of the Bet HaMikdash, and he disputed the other rabbis on 4 matters, and they didn't kill him. Why didn't they kill him? Because he had a tradition from his teacher. And so since he had a tradition from his teacher, even though he went against the Sanhedrin, this follows Rav Kana's rule that you don't kill someone who has a tradition. Rabbi Elazar omer, afilu hu omer mepi hashimoah v'hen omrim kachu be'ainenu neherag, kedeh shelo yirbu machalokot be'Yisrael. Rabbi Elazar disputes Rav Kana. And he says, even if the elder says, even if he says, I have a tradition, and they say, listen, we don't have a tradition, but we think based on our own reasoning, the halacha should be differently, and the Zaken Mamre, based on a valid tradition that he has, an authentic tradition, he goes against the Sanhedrin. Nevertheless, he is killed. Why? Why would you kill the Zaken Mamre when he has an actual oral tradition? Here's the reason, so that machalokot, factions, and factionalism should not increase in Israel. That's the greatest threat, is that everybody's doing different things, and there's different sects. Each one thinks that the other one's doing the wrong thing, and Israel splits into many different subgroups, and that's the biggest threat, not having unity. It's better to have unity, and even if they're not following this particular oral tradition, even though we trust it, and he must have had an oral tradition, nevertheless, more important for the sake of unity, that they follow the majority Sanhedrin, even if the Sanhedrin themselves didn't have a tradition. That's Rabbi Elazar's opinion, unity above all. And now you'll ask, well then why didn't they kill Akavya ben Mahalalel? So what, he had a tradition, but Rabbi Elazar said, even if you have a tradition, but you go against the majority, no matter what, you get the death penalty because you're going to cause a split among Israel. And the answer is, Akavya ben Mahalalel never gave a practical ruling that people should follow his own opinion. He argued for it, theoretically, very strongly. I have a tradition, this is the right way to do it, but he never actually told someone in practice to follow his minority opinion. We now present 2 challenges against Rav Kahana. The first one is from our Mishnah. Tenan, kach darashti v'kach darshu chaberai, kach lemadeti v'kach limedu chaberai. My love, dehu amar mepi hashimoah v'hem omrim kachu be'einenu. In the Mishnah, when the local court doesn't know, then they come to the 3rd highest court and they say, this is what I taught, this is what I interpreted, this is what my friends interpreted, this is what I taught, this is what they taught. So it seems that this is referring to all possible cases, no matter whether this one said I have a tradition, or that one said I had tradition, or reason, or that one said I had reason. So wouldn't this certainly include a case where the Zaken Mamre said I have a tradition, and the other side said this is based on reason, and yet that is included in the law of Zaken Mamre, and we would kill him. And so you see, this fits with Rabbi Elazar, and this goes against Rav Kahana. How is Rav Kahana going to answer this? And he'll say, Lo hu omer kachu be'ainai v'hem omrim mepi hashimoah. No, when the Mishnah says this, it wasn't talking about all possible cases, but rather only a case where the Zaken Mamre says, this is what I think based on my own personal reasoning, and they say, we have a tradition, so the tradition certainly is going to win over, and he has no legs to stand on. That's the case where we kill him, but the Mishnah was only referring to that case, not no matter what he says or wherever he gets it from. Okay, Rav Kana answered that question, but he's not going to be so lucky the next time. Tashema damar bi Yoshia sheloshat devrim sachli zaira me'anshe Yerushalayim Baal shemachal al kinuyo machul. So we have a statement by Rabbi Yoshia that there were three things that Zaira taught him from the sages in Yerushalayim. And the first one is, let's say a husband warns his wife that says, don't be secluded with that guy. Gives him a warning, otherwise she's going to be a sotah. But then sometime later, he was angry when he said that, he calmed himself down, and now he says, you know what? Forget about it. I want to take back my warning to you. And if he does that, then the warning is null and void. And even if she would go seclude with that guy afterwards, she would not be a sotah, because the husband has the right to warn his wife in the first place because he feels jealous, he feels suspicious. And now if he doesn't anymore, then he can retract the warning. He has a right to do so. And the same thing with the father and mother. They bring their son in because they're very upset and worried about the son, because the son went and stole and ate and meat and wine, and they say, come to court, and they say, we want you to kill this child, because they're so enraged and so angry. And let's say after some time, they calm down. You say, you know what? All right, he's a little mischievous, but we don't want him to be stoned to death. So if the parents come to the court and say, we forgive him, it's their right to forgive him. That probably is the whole reason for the law of Ben Surah Moreh, is that in the olden days, a father had a right to kill his sons with his children without any legal problems. That was considered property. So Torah says, no, don't kill him, bring him to the court. We'll kill him for you. Of course, the court's not going to kill him. It's just a way for the court to get involved. Hey, listen, father, sometimes kids do this, but try to calm down, and hopefully he'll calm down. So really the whole point of Ben Surah Moreh in this interpretation is to make sure that the parents calm down and forgive the child, and hopefully they'll get some therapy from the court and live happily ever after. Zaken mamre sherasu betin limcholo mochalin lo. And the third item that Ze'ira reported from the elders of Jerusalem is that, let's say there's a rebellious elder. He taught or practiced against the Sanhedrin, and the Sanhedrin gets together and say, he's a rebellious elder, we should kill him. But then they say, you know what, he's our old friend, let's forgive him. They can forgive him, it's okay, and they'll reconcile and not give him the death penalty. So that was the ruling that Ze'ira reported from the men of Jerusalem. However, Rabbi Yoshia, who is reporting all of this in the name of Ze'ira, he says that when I came, I came to my colleagues in the south, and I reported what Ze'ira told me in the name of Anshe Yerushalayim. Al Shanaim Hoduli, Val Zaken Mamre Lo Hoduli. They agreed regarding the first two, that a husband or a parent can forgive the wife or the child. However, regarding the third one, Zaken Mamre, they did not agree to. There's no right for the other sages to forgive a Zaken Mamre. They have to give him capital punishment. Why? Kedesh Lo Yidbu Machlokot Be Yisrael Tiyubta, so that there should not be increased factions in Israel. It's not okay to be nice to the Zaken Mamre. So, we feel bad for this guy. No, he's dangerous. It doesn't seem so dangerous, just arguing on a particular law, but that is very dangerous, because if he goes against the Sanhedrin, he's going against the whole judicial system. He's going to start a new religion. There's going to be sub-religions and sub-religions within Israel, and there'll be more and more factions and disagreement among Israel. That is a great threat to the future of the Jewish nation, and therefore it's not up to them to forgive him, they have to kill him. So we see that this reasoning is a support for the Bi'el Azad that says no matter what, it doesn't matter whether he has a tradition or doesn't have a tradition, you kill him in all cases for that very reason. That's a support for the Bi'el Azad and a conclusive refutation of Rav Kahana. Tanya. Now we have a Baraita that's going to expand and give a lot more details about how these three levels of courts, of high courts, worked. Amar Rabbi Yoseh, Metechila lo hayu banbin machaloket beYisrael. This is at first, in the early generations, there was not a lot of diversity, of discord among Israel. Everybody was on the same page. Everybody practiced the same law. אלא בית דין של 71 יושבים בלשכת הגזית, ושני בתי דינים של 23, אחד יושב על פתח הר הבית ואחד יושב על פתח הזרה, ושאר בתי דינים של 23 יושבים בכל עיירות ישראל. And this is why there was uniformity of practice. There was still diversity of ideas. There was always many different opinions. That's very good. It's good to have many opinions theoretically, to talk about, to think about, to study Torah. But when it came to practice, there were no factions that one group did this and one group did that. Why? Why were there no factions? Because there was a Sanhedrin, and they would decide on everything. So here's how the details worked. There was one Bet Din of 71 sages that was in the chamber of hewn stone, part of the Bet HaMikdash structure itself. And there were two more courts of 23 each. One was at the entrance to Har HaBayit and one at the entrance to the Azara. And then there were other Bet Din of 23 people. A 23-person judge can adjudicate a capital case. And those were in all the major cities all over Israel. Now, if there was some kind of matter, a case came up, a question came up, and they needed to know the answer, they don't go straight to the Sanhedrin. They go to their local court. If they know, good. If they don't know the answer, they go to the next city, maybe a bigger city that has a more authoritative court, and ask them. If they have a tradition, good. If they don't know, then they come to the third highest court that's at the entrance of the Temple Mount. If they know, good. If they don't know, then they come to the one that's at the entrance to the courtyard. And the elder who came all the way from the local court and didn't know the answer, so he presents the case. This is what I interpreted. This is what they interpreted. This is what I taught. This is what they taught. If this court has a tradition, they will tell them, oh yes, we have a tradition, we know the law about this. But if they don't know, then these and those, meaning the people that came from the local court and the people that came from the second highest court, the judges themselves, right? All the judges from all the courts who didn't know, they have to learn too. So they all come, and the group gets bigger and bigger as you go along, all the way up until you come to the Sanhedrin, and then all the people that didn't know before come and ask. Shesham yoshbin mitamid shel shachar ad tamid shel harbayim, because it's in that chamber of hewn stone that the Sanhedrin would sit from the time of the morning offering, which was from dawn until Ben Harbaim, until the afternoon, sacrifice, the other Korban Tamid, is given. So the whole time, they're sitting there and listening to cases and deciding laws. Now on Shabbat and Yom Tov, the Sanhedrin does not officially gather, so they don't go to their normal chamber of hewn stone. But they still go there and they still learn about things and they still discuss Torah. They sit in the Chel, another room that's also in the Bet HaMikdash, to study there. The question is asked before them. If they know the tradition, they'll say so. If they say, we have no tradition about this, first time this ever came up, then they will discuss it and vote. If most people say it's tameh, if it's a case of tahor and tameh, then you follow the majority as tameh, or if the majority says tahor, then they say it's tahor, or whatever kind of a case it is. Chayav, patur. Rabu tamidah shamai v'hilel shelo shimshu kol surkan rabu mahalokot b'Yisrael v'nasi Torah kishteh torot. So this is in the early days, going all the way back in the second Bet HaMikdash. There was no factionalism because the Sanhedrin was in charge and everybody followed what the Sanhedrin said. It was good. However, when the students of Shammai and Hillel became many, and that's good, it's good that they had many students, but the problem is that they did not attend to their masters sufficiently. They sat in class and they got the major points. Yeah, so you don't find machloket on major areas like, is cooking a melacha or not? That's kind of obvious. But rather, it's on the details. So they didn't pay sufficient attention to the details that their teachers were saying. Shammai and Hillel themselves actually have very few machalokot, right? They discussed everything, they voted, that's fine. But when there was many students, and the students in the back weren't paying attention to every single detail, and then so what did he say this, did he say that? Then there became many different opinions, and that's when dispute proliferated among Israel, and tragically the Torah became like two Torahs. You go to this city and you see they're practicing one way, and you go to another city or to another Bet Knesset and you see it looks completely different. These people are standing up, these people are sitting down. What are they? They looks like they're following two different Torahs. It seems like two religions, which is not the way it's supposed to be. But unfortunately, that's what happened. Misham kotvin v'sholchin bechol mekomot. The Baraita continues to discuss how the Sanhedrin works and how the local Bet Din works. Kol mishu chacham ushval berech v'data b'riot nocha hemenu yeh dayan be'iro. From the great Sanhedrin, they send messengers, they send letters to everywhere else, all the other cities, and they say, go look for anyone, any student who's wise and humble, and the people, he's well liked by the people, and appoint him as a local judge in his own city, and he'll serve there, and he'll get training there. Misham malino tol harabait. Once he gets experience there, and he shows that he's talented, so then he gets a promotion, and he goes up to the court that's on harabait. Misham lazaram misham leishkat hagazit. And if he's still good, so then he goes up to the azara, and if he really shows great talent and great proficiency and humility, and is well liked and is wise, then he becomes a member of the great Sanhedrin that's in Lishkat HaGazit. Shalchu mitam ezeu ben haolam haba. Now, since we mentioned the good traits that one should have as a judge, so now we have another statement that also they sent from Eretz Yisrael, and they asked, who is worthy of going to the world to come? An vetan ushval berech shayif ayil shayif enafik vegares beodaita tedira velama hazik tibuta lenafshe yabu berabanan anaihon berab ula bar abba. Who is worthy of the world to come? Someone who's modest and humble. He bows when he enters, he bows when he exits, meaning he's always showing himself to be lower than everybody else. He studies Torah all the time and never takes credit for himself. When they heard that, they were looking around to say, who's worthy, who fits the bill for all of these things? And they all looked at Rav Ula bar Abba because he had all of these good character traits. Chazar le'iro v'shana. Back to the Mishnah. If this elder came to the Sanhedrin and he asked them the question and they said the halacha is like A, and let's say he goes back to his city and he says, I think halacha is like B, we don't kill him if he teaches only theoretically. He says, listen, even though they said this, here's the reasons why I disagree. That's fine. He could disagree theoretically all day long. But we only kill him if he practices or teaches others to practice against the Sanhedrin. Tenorabanan, eno chayav ad sheyaseh kehorato or sheyore lacherim veyasu kehorato. That's what this Baraita says. The rebellious elder is not liable unless he actually practices what he preaches or he teaches others to practice an actuality according to his own opinion. That is not allowed to do. Theoretically, he can teach, but not give a practical ruling. Now the Gemara asks a question on this Baraita. Bishlama yoreh la'acherim v'yasu kehora'ato me'ikara lav bar ketalahu v'ashta bar ketalahu. We understand the case of where the Zaken Mamre teaches others after he comes back from the Sanhedrin. He tells someone to follow his own law. So now the Zaken Mamre deserves a death penalty because he went against the Sanhedrin. This case makes sense because before he went and met with the Sanhedrin, what did he do before? He taught others that also. Let's say it was a matter of Hilchot Shabbat. And he said to people, you're allowed to do this on Shabbat. And so people went and did it. Beforehand, he's not liable. He didn't violate Shabbat himself. He only taught others and he followed his opinion. So that's fine. He didn't do anything that's liable before. But now, afterwards, now that he went to the Sanhedrin and they told him, no, the halakha is that doing this on Shabbat is not allowed. So now, if he goes back and tells others to do it, so he's going to be liable. That we understand the case. But the clause that says, or if he does it himself, if he practices what he preaches, well, if he practiced what he preaches even before he went to the Sanhedrin, he also also deserves the death penalty, because if he did a certain thing that he thought was allowed on Shabbat, but really it wasn't allowed, so he violated Shabbat, we should bring him himself to capital punishment for violating Shabbat even before he comes back and does it after the Sanhedrin tells him not to, because he violated Shabbat even before, because that was not the law. So what do you mean that now he's liable? He would have been liable anyway. So we answer, okay, we can answer partially. We understand this clause if he made a ruling about eating cheleb or eating dam. He said this certain part of the fat, this is permitted, but really it's cheleb. He said this situation of dam is allowed, but really it's not allowed. So beforehand, he was liable to bring a korban hatat, karet, for eating that, but not chayav mitah. So let's say he did it himself before. He ate such a thing that he ruled was permitted, and then the Sanhedrin says it's not permitted. So, well, they told him you did something wrong, so he'll be chayav, whatever that sin is, but it's not capital punishment. If he comes back and tells other people to do it, or does it himself, now he'll be liable to capital punishment for going against the Sanhedrin, even though the eating itself is not capital punishment, just the going against the Sanhedrin is capital punishment. So that makes sense. But if he taught something about a law for which one is killed in Beit Din, and he did it himself before, then he is already liable to capital punishment anyway, besides coming back and doing it again and being killed as Zaken Mamreh. So that's what we're wondering. How would you have a case where, now that he heard from the Sanhedrin, now he's liable and he wasn't before? And the answer is, Here's the answer. Before he went to the Beit Din, in order to be liable to capital punishment, he would need a warning, right? Because maybe he really thought it was permitted. So he needs someone to say, hey, don't you know, this is prohibited, the Sanhedrin said so, you're going to get this capital punishment. And he has to say, yes, I know, and I'm going to do it anyway. Only then he would get capital punishment. And if he didn't get the warning, then he wouldn't get capital punishment. So let's assume that beforehand he thought it was allowed. So no one told him was it. He didn't get a warning. But now, after he goes to the Sanhedrin, if he goes and teaches others or does it himself, now he is liable even without a warning, because now he's being killed not only for violating Shabbat or whatever the sin is itself that he's doing. He's also liable as a rebellious elder, because the Sanhedrin already told him to do this thing and he's doing something else. He may, by the way, need warning that he's going against the Sanhedrin and he will be killed as a Zaken Mamreh for doing this, a separate warning. But he won't need a warning for, hey, don't you know that this is violating Shabbat or whatever particular sin that he is doing. Now we ask about that. What about someone who instigates others to idol worship? When in general we're very, very stringent on someone who does that, and we give every reason to hold the person liable, and we don't need a warning, and we don't give him a chance and invite people to offer arguments for innocence, because we just want to put this guy away, because inciting to idolatry is so bad. So in that case, he would have been liable anyway, even without hatra'ah beforehand. And the answer is, Meikara'i amar ta'ama mekabelinan mineh. Hashtaya'i amar ta'ama la mekabelinan mineh. In that case, even though for an instigator, generally, we try to find every reason to kill him, but if he comes and says, I have a reason, this is why I did this, I have an excuse, we will listen to him if he offers it. We're not going to try, unlike other capital punishments where we try everything we can to find innocence. Here, we won't, but we'll listen to him if he says he has a reason. That's before he went to the Sanhedrin. But now afterwards, if the Sanhedrin says, this is idolatry and you can't do that, and he goes and does it anyway, then we don't even listen to any excuse that he might have, and we put him to death. And so there is a difference from before and after. So that's how we explain that baraita for all cases. Next Mishnah. Chomer bedivrei sofrim me bedivrei Torah. האומר אין תפילין כדי לעבור על דברי תורה, פטור. 5 תותפות להוסיף על דברי סופרים, חייב. Here's another limitation regarding the Zaken Mamreh. There's a way in which דברי סופרים, the Rabbanan laws, are more stringent than the Oraita laws. Usually the Oraita laws are much more stringent. If you have a safek the Oraita, you have to be machmir. A safek the Rabbanan, you could be mekel. But When it comes to Zaken Mamre, it's the other way around. If someone comes and says, Zaken comes and makes a ruling against the Torah explicitly, he's not killed as a Zaken Mamre. He comes and says pig is kosher. He's not killed as a Zaken Mamre. He's wrong, but the Torah will hold its own, has its own authority, and will not be undermined by some Zaken Mamre, some Zaken who's teaching otherwise. So we don't have to worry about that. We have to worry much more about an elder, respected elder, who's going against the authority of the other sages. Therefore, Hamed en tefillin kedei labor ad Torah patur. If someone comes and says, you don't have to wear tefillin, there's no such law, so even though it's incorrect, but we don't give him capital punishment, because you just read it yourself. Everybody who knows how to read a little bit can read that that you have to put on tefillin. However, chamesh totafot losif al divrei sofrim hayav. But if he comes and says that you have to wear 5 sections in your tefillin, we have 4 sections. Instead, he says, oh, you need 5 sections. He adds another one, and he's adding to what the rabbi said. Then he is liable, because the Torah doesn't say explicitly how many sections. If he comes and says 5, so then we might think he's right. And if he's an elder, he will have the power. He might have the power to weaken the authority of the majority of rabbis. This may not be just a theoretical case, because we found tefillin among the Dead Sea Scrolls, and while they actually do have 4 compartments, so that part is the same. But when you open them up, they have extra long compartments. They have extra long scrolls, more text than we have. And in some of them, they have Shema, just like we have, but they have the whole chapter before Shema, including Aseret HaDiberot. So this might be in some way what this Mishnah is referring to, not just a theoretical example of, let's say, for example, someone says 5 compartments. This might be reacting to actual sectarians who thought that we should put in, instead of just the 4 paragraphs that we have in our tefillin until today, that we should put in other things. The other tefillin were found also with some other sections in them, even though the tefillin that have sections, like the tefillin shalosh, all only have 4, but this may be a reference to something like that. Okay, so now the Gemara comments. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Oshaya, Eno chayav ela al davar, sheikaro midibrei Torah, uperusho midibrei sofrim, v'yesh po lehosif, v'mosif goreya, v'enanu ela tefillin alibad Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Elazar, in the name of Rabbi Oshaya, says, as a ken mamre will be held liable to capital punishment only on a case that fits into the following criteria. It has to be something that its essence is from the Torah. It can't be a totally Darabanan law. It has to be something that is grounded in a pasuk, like tefillin is. And it has to be that the explanation of it is midivrei sofrim. The Torah is not so clear about how exactly to do it, and you need the rabbis to come and give definitions of how to do it. Okay, there's many examples of that. But furthermore, it has to be something that you can add to. It has to be something that has a certain number, and that you can come and say, instead of 4, you should put 5. And it has to be something that if you would add to it, it's not better, it actually makes it worse. It's unlike, tzedakah. Okay, you have to give this much. If you give more, okay, it doesn't annul the amount that you gave already. You gave more, okay, good, so give more. But it has to be something that there's such a thing as adding to it, and when you add to it, it's to the detriment of the entire mitzvah. So what examples do we have of that? Actually, only one example. The example of tefillin, as we just said. It's something that's in the Torah. How to do it exactly is based on the rabbis explaining it. And it's something that has a number, 4 sections, and so that you can add to it. And if you add to it, then you're ruining the whole mitzvah. And so this would follow. This would be tefillin, and this would be within the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who well away above when we saw machloket with Rabbi Meir. And others, Rabbi Yehuda said that a rebellious elder is someone where he rules against a matter that's from the Torah, but the explanation is according to the rabbi. So here that also has those elements, and then we add more elements, which means the whole law of Zaken Mamre can only apply to one case. Now you can understand also why it was so infrequent that the Bet Din actually killed anyone. I imagine there were many times when there was an elder that disagreed with the majority. That could happen often, but it has to fit into particularly this criteria. So unless he disagrees with tefillin specifically, he's not killed. And again, this could go back to the actual sectarians who thought that you should put more sections in the tefillin. So the rabbis were directing Zaken Mamre specifically about that group of people that were adding more sections to tefillin, and they did make a totally separate subgroup of Judaism. Okay, now the Gemara asks, hold on, we do have another example. Rabbi Elazar said only tefillin, but how about lulav? Lulav's in the Torah. The explanation, how would you know what to bring, how many to bring? So the explanation is from the words of the Sofrim, and you can add to it, right? Here's 4 species, you can add more species. And if you add more, then you're ruining, you're compromising, you're taking away from the entire mitzvah. So isn't that should be a good example also. If a Zaken Mamre comes back and says you have to take these 4 species plus also a grapefruit, you have to put that in also and shake it. So how do we? So maybe that also should be included. So we answer, but lulav, my seviralan, iseviralan de lulav en sarich eged haylechudev kae v'haylechude kae. There's a machlokent in general whether the 4 species have to be tied together or you can hold them loose. So if you have to tie them together, well, then if you don't have to tie them together, if we follow that opinion, well then so what? I'm holding a lulav, I'm holding the hadas, I'm holding the aravot, I'm holding all the correct things, and I also bring something else, right? I also have a tomato. So what? Since I don't need them to be bound together, so then the tomato just happens to be nearby. Okay, so what? I'm holding it together with them, but it's not considered part of them, and so I should still be able to fulfill the mitzvah. So I'm not taking away. It's not goreya just because I added, the Zaken said, also hold something else. So then that shouldn't be goreya. And if you think that you need to bind them together, and then you take some other item, a cucumber, and you put it in, you tie it together, you know what? Then that is considered nothing. You're holding a random bunch of vegetables, and you're not holding a lulav and etrog, a set that would be a kosher set. So it shouldn't be a negative. You're not fulfilling the mitzvah, but you're not making a sin by doing that. Since they have to be bound together, and you're including something that doesn't belong within the binding, so it ruins the whole binding. You're just holding a random group of things, and so that also is not goreya. You're not ruining it by putting in this item because it has to be bound with only those things. It's already garua, and so we couldn't have such a case. All right, fine. That case doesn't work. So now we ask from another example. We have the example of sisit, which is in the Torah, and the rabbis have to explain exactly how to make the sisit. And when they said how to make it, they said you put 4 threads. You put 4 threads through the hole, and then you fold them up. So when they're folded, then you have 8, and you have to put precisely 4. Now, if you add, it's possible to add more because it's a number. So if the Zaken Mamre comes and says, you have to put 5 threads through, then when you fold them over, you'll get 10 total. Well, if you do that, then you're adding, but by adding, you are taking away because you're ruining the whole mitzvah. Then it's not called tzitzit at all. So this should be a good example. How come you said above that tefillin is the only example that fits this criteria? Sisit should also fit. So we answer, Besisit mai sebidalan, isebidalan de kesher ha'alyon lav de oraita, ha'lechude ka'eh v'ha'lechude ka'eh. There's a machloket whether the first knot, so here's when you put it in, you just fold it over, is that sufficient on the deoraita level? Okay, look, you have the sisit, you have fringes there. Or do you have to make a knot, that first knot, in order to make it kosher mideoraita? So if you say that the first knot is not necessary deoraita, so on the deoraita level, you have 4 strings in there. So look at those separately, and there happens to be another string that's in the same hole nearby. So okay, so consider it separate, and there's 4 strings, so then it's good. Then it should be kosher, and by adding one, you're not ruining the mitzvah, then it's totally good. And if you think that the making the first knot is required deoraita, then the second you make the knot with all 5 strings, it's already bad. It never was good. We need a case where it's kosher kosher right now when you have 4, but then when you add 1, then it becomes not kosher. You see, with tefillin, that will work better. We're going to, as we're about to explain. So right here, for sisit, it doesn't work no matter what, because either the sisit is kosher without a knot, and then it's still good, just even with 5, because we can count it as 4 and 1. And if you need to put a knot, then it was never good, even the second you made the knot. So it was already bad in the first place. We need something that was good, and now by adding 1 more, you're making it bad. So we hachit tefillin nameh. I avid arba'a bateh va'ite achrina ve'anach gabayihu hay lechude ka'eh v'hay lechude ka'eh. We can apply the same question to tefillin. If you made 4 sections like this is how tefillin are made. So there's 4 sections. If originally you had 4 sections, so you have kosher tefillin, and then you're adding another one, you put another one on the side of it somewhere, then you can consider them separate, right? Why not just say, here, I have my tefillin here, that's 4 sections, that's my tefillin. And there has to be something that's attached on the side, right? Another item. So we could just consider it separate and not take away from the main mitzvah of 4. Avi abid chamisha bateh garua v'omed hu. And if at the beginning you make 5 sections, well then it was not good, not kosher to begin with. So how would you have a case where it's kosher and by adding 1 you make it not kosher? Because if you make it kosher and then you just add 1 on the side, so then fine, but we could just consider it separate. So why is tefillin any different from sisit and lulav? Ha'amad bizera bait chison sheno ro'eh ta'avir pasul. The answer is that what Bizera taught. If you have tefillin where the outermost section does not see the air, then it's no good. Meaning, if you add a piece over here on top of the outer section, then it makes the whole tefillin no good. You can't treat it as separate. With sisit, you could do that. Just here's another string. The other string being nearby doesn't take anything away. But here, by adding another section nearby, it actually does take it away. So tefillin works because we're talking about a case where originally you had 4 sections, a nice kosher tefillin, perfectly fine. Then you add another one, and then you add it on the side such that the outermost does not see the air anymore. Now, by adding 1, you're making the whole thing no good. So that's the example of where zaken mamreh will be killed, and is the only example we could find that fits precisely into all of these criteria. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.